Oh, welcome! Hello! This is the Bionicle Inspiration series, and today we're going to be talking all about frames. In the Bionicle Inspiration series, we like to take a specific theme and then take a look at a bunch of different MOCs from across the Bionicle community and just sort of analyze what they're doing, focus on some tips and tricks and different things, and see what we can learn, see if this sort of stuff can inspire us to build our own cool stuff. Now, when I say frames for today's episode theme, what do I mean by frames? Well, one cool thing about your old Bionicle here is when you look at some of the sets, they all kind of have the same basic frame for the most part. It differs here and there, but you got your Ataka builds. They all had a very similar sort of torso, arm, leg, kind of construction. Your Hero Factory sets had fairly similar sort of torso and bone construction, and for the most part, it was just about sort of slapping armor on in different ways or different sort of orientations and things like that. So why don't we use that same kind of basic principle, but for the MOCs that we make? So the different frames I'm going to show you today, some of them have instructions, some of them don't, but either way we can learn a thing or two from them, and we're just going to sort of talk about how you could maybe yourself build a sort of very specific frame that's inspired by some of these, and then just add the armor over the top, because that's kind of half the job done. If you've got that basic frame that you can kind of work off of, you can pretty easily do the rest. So something that might make your job a little bit easier. Let's dive into the very, very first frame / build that we've got for today, and that one here has been built by Max Howell, and this is VS Robot. So I think what's pretty cool about this is the frame itself is a little bit more sort of simplistic, and it's a very like effective frame, and it allows for some sort of kind of like minor customization options, but also at the same time, it kind of could just work as its own sort of distinct build. So if you're looking for something pretty easy to work with, or stuff that's something that you want to kind of, I don't know, I guess like just add your own little personal touches and flares to, this is the frame for you in this advert here. We're selling this frame. I've not been paid to advertise these, I promise, but that's what it sounded like. Anyway, so there are some images here that sort of break it down in some fashion, but be sure to check Max out on Instagram to see, well, a few different things actually. You can see a whole bunch of different MOCs that have been inspired by this frame that have been built either by him or by other people, so be sure to take a look at those. There's a link in the description. But let's talk about how the frame was made itself. So let's kind of take a look at the torso right now. So we can see that a lot of it was built around this mutter foot piece. And then we can see the sort of limbs branching out to the side there, which kind of look like little baby hands, baby feet. The the waist itself, I think, is really interesting because it's using a Borok arm piece, which is a pretty cool, pretty helpful piece, and works very, very nicely here. Obviously, there's your typical kind of prefab waist pieces, but it's very nice when you can kind of customize it a little bit using actual pieces to mimic something like that. So I think that's a nice little part use there and a good use of that piece. Some of the other stuff we can see is this kind of like neck flab thing. I don't know what to call it. Obviously, the foot piece has that sort of like socket connection there. So he's just placed one of the Hordika neck pieces in there just to kind of fill in that gap. And I really, really like that, just to make that look a little bit less awkward, because it kind of doesn't look nice just having that exposed socket there. So just that little... Oh, hello. Apologies, I bumped my mic. So just having that little addition there just to kind of fill in that gap is a really nice thing to do. And sometimes if you got little gaps on your MOCs here and there, it's always nice to kind of fill it in with a different piece or two. But you don't always need to do it, but sometimes it gets the job done, and I think this is a nice example of exactly that. I also like the neck design. When we look at this from behind, we can see another mutter head on the back there, which of course kind of mimics the top there, which is certainly interesting. But we can see that there's kind of like tires around this sort of like connector piece, and this very sort of prominent neck. It looks like there's a bit of funky neck posability there, which is not a word I've said before. But it's cool. It's interesting. And it's just a kind of different way of doing it. And you don't really see sort of elongated necks like that too much on a MOC, but it looks like there's a good amount of posability there, so that's certainly interesting. Taking a look at like the arms specifically, I love how he's used the tires there on the lower arm, just because, just kind of adding in tires like that, it makes for a pretty decent sort of slimmed down limb design, so it's a good way of doing it. But I also like that he's included the tire as sort of like the elbow there. It's just a bit different. It's kind of cool. I don't know, you don't really see too many sort of pronounced elbows as much on a mock, or at least obviously every mock has an elbow for the most part, but like, actually really accenting it there with the choice of putting the tire there. So it's kind of cool. I also like on the legs the fact that it's a very different foot design. No actual sort of foot. The leg just kind of transitions into the foot in that sense. There's no sort of distinction between the two. But it's a bit more of a sort of funky looking foot design there. Looks a little bit more sort of like robotic, mechanical, industrial or something. It's just a good way of doing it. So that's sort of a bit of a breakdown of how the frame was done. Let's talk a bit about the actual mock, and from that we'll also be talking a bit more about the frame. So I'm going to specifically use it in reference to another mock that Max has done, which is, just a more of a kind of character of this frame here. So it's got a bit of a different color scheme and some other nice stuff going on with it. So I love the fact that this mock just has that mutter head as the head. Obviously with this frame, you could put a mask over the top of the mutter head, or you could probably just change the head entirely if you wanted. You don't have to 100% adhere to this if you wanted to reverse engineer this. But I like that. It actually kind of works nicely just to have the mutter head there. It sort of fits with the sort of overall aesthetic of this mock. But it's nice to know that if you wanted to further upgrade and customize this, you could kind of just do whatever you wanted with the head. So, hey. That's pretty cool. Overall, there's just some pretty cool, like, smooth, unique textures to this mock. It's just really cool. So, hey, if you're looking for a good frame, this is a good mock for that. Let's move over now to the next mock. This is Saturnicus Frame by Bonkles Moc. What I like about this is that this specific frame has a good amount of posability, but also kind of has a lot of room to kind of play with. There's a lot of different connection points all throughout it, and just in general, it's just a good example of a frame. You can do a lot with it. So let us dive in. What do I specifically like? Well, I mentioned a lot of the different connection points. So let's start off with the sort of lower legs here. We can see that sort of around the knee, there is just some sort of axles sticking out and a sort of connector piece sort of pointing upwards. So it kind of gives you a lot of room to kind of add armor onto that, or build a sort of more pronounced like kind of knee pad almost, which, hey, that always looks cool. So that's an interesting way of doing that. But it's also interesting to see on sort of that kind of knee connection area, there's two kind of prefab Hero Factory bone pieces there. So you could actually sort of armor up the knees on the sides as well, or maybe on the back or even the front. So it's nice to see that if you were to build this frame, there's a lot of different possibilities there that you can kind of armor over the top of. A lot of different connection points. So if you want to build your own kind of custom frame, really do that. Add a lot of just random things sticking out, different socket or ball connections or axles or pins or whatever, just so that you can put stuff over the top of it. And you can put it in key areas like that, like the knee pad, or sort of on the sides or something, just areas where you think you're going to be putting armor, add some of those connection points. So if you're looking to build your own, certainly focus on that. But looking at this example here, if you wanted to reverse engineer it, I don't believe there are instructions for this, but there's some pretty detailed pictures here, so you could probably reverse engineer this if you wanted to. Regardless, it's nice to see how that's done, and how it leaves a lot of room for armor to be put over the top and for your imagination to kind of get going. This is almost a sort of blank canvas, and you've got your paints ready now, and you're going to put it over the top of the canvas, almost. Or maybe it's like a paint by numbers, I suppose. All the numbers are there, and you know what you need to put in. You've got the colors. You're going to do it now, I suppose. Maybe that's a better example. The other thing I like about this mock is the cool finger design. Definitely looks nice and actually has, an accurate amount of fingers. A lot of your typical Bionicle finger designs normally kind of just go for the 2 fingers and 1 thumb, whereas this one here is, a usual hand design, which looks really nice. So it's a nice addition there. When we take a look at the sort of upper half of this torso here, specifically focusing on the upper arms, we can see again some more of your typical kind of ball socket connection pieces, using those really, really cool dark bluish grey connector pieces where there's a ball joint in the middle and 2 of the sort of circle connectors just above it there. So you can see that those have been placed on the front and the back there. So again, you can easily put armor on both sides there and just sort of kind of cover that up in some fashion. But it's also interesting to see towards the top, there's just sort of a random hand connector kind of sticking out. So you could kind of pose that or move that around and then add armor over the top of it, so that you could really go crazy with your sort of, I guess, like shoulder pad designs, or just different ways of armoring up the upper arm there. So I think what I like about that so much is the fact that kind of looking at it now, it's kind of just a mesh of pieces. You know, there's a random arm sticking out. There's all sorts of connection pieces like those ball joints or the pinholes and different stuff like that. And you know, if you didn't armor it up, it would look a bit like a little bit of a mess, you know? But that's a good thing because this is a frame. You're going to cover all that up. It doesn't need to look pretty. It's like the inside of a computer. It might look nice to some people, but for the most part, it's just sort of a mesh of different circuits and different things. But you're going to put a nice cover over the top of it later, you know? So it's nice to know that if you are building a frame, for the most part, you could just build a weird, crazy mesh of things that doesn't look aesthetically pleasing or nice at all. But just know, oh, okay, I have room to play with. I can add stuff over the top of all of this. There's a multiple different amount of connection points all throughout this. I can put stuff over the top of it. So, I don't know. I just think that's pretty cool and kind of makes sense as a good kind of basic principle to go with if you want to be building frames yourself. So, that's pretty cool. It's also really nice to see in this specific picture here where he's kind of doing a bit of a squat down, taking a look at how the pistons are being used. So pistons are really important if you want to build a sort of slightly larger frame, but they can also work for smaller frames as well. You saw it on official Bionicle sets. Sometimes you need a sort of sturdy looking piston just to sort of add sort of structural support, because sometimes a mock will be too tall and it can't support its own weight. So adding an additional piston on the back of the leg or on the arms or on the torso or something like that, we'll see some more examples of that later, is just a great way of just adding a little bit more structural integrity. So we can see how that's been done here is by making the foot a little bit longer than it normally would be, and adding in some connection points so that that piston can attach into it. So there's a sturdier base of support on the foot, and then that piston there is acting as a sort of additional strut that when he does squat over like this, just helps him stand up, gives him a little bit of support there. So very fitting, very helpful, and nice to see how it's sort of connecting into some of those lift arms that attach onto the upper leg as well. So it's almost as if he has sort of like two lower legs there, but it's a little bit more sort of it's just that sort of specific piston beam. So it's not this sort of super heavily armored section there that makes the legs just look super bulky and just doesn't fit with the rest of the design. It's just an additional piston there that gets the job done and helps structurally, which is its main goal. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, really nice to see how posable this frame is and nice to see how many different connection points are on it for the final mock. So let's talk a bit about that final mock now. This one's pretty cool. The head design is kind of crazy, kind of cool. Uses Black Phantom's mask, but has a whole bunch of different crazy, like, I don't know, almost like Roman centurion style, like feathers and headdress sort of stuff there that makes this guy look pretty unique and pretty cool. Some other stuff I like is the color scheme, the dark, well, not dark, the trans purple mixed in with the sort of different kind of black and gunmetal and stuff. Looks lovely. And the kind of big old club that he's got going on here using some of that Stronius armor. That's pretty cool. That's a really, really nice looking weapon there. So yeah, a lot to love about this one. It's very unique and very different. And it's also a very, very cool frame, like we spoke about before. So let us now move over to the next mock. Now, this one here is built by Vincent Steffen, or Gerou 100, and this is Artakha. So, of course, this is an actual canon character. We'll talk a bit briefly about the mock itself, then we can dive into the actual frame itself. This originally didn't have a sort of actual canon image for the character, but some of the TTV canonization contests have given this life. So this is sort of more inspired by Connor Hoffman's take on the character, which is the sort of quote-unquote official fan art for it now. And it's pretty cool. I love Connor's version of it, but it's nice to see a sort of different interpretation of that character because, well, you know, just because there is a canon image of the character doesn't mean you can't do your own take on that version there. So very, very cool. There is actually a more updated version of this mock here, which has a different mask, uses a little bit more system, and I think actually looks quite nice. But for this specific example, I'm going to focus on the older version, just because that's what there are images of the frame of that, not of the older, or the newer one, excuse me. So we'll just focus on this older one. Both are pretty cool. I personally probably prefer the newer version, but hey, this older version is just as cool. So let us dive in to let's talk about the mock first. I said that before, so we'll do it. I like the fact that it's using a sort of silver version of that mask, which this is a more sort of customized mask, but it certainly looks like it's taking some inspiration from Akimu's Mask of Creation, which this character does wield in the Bionicle story. I like the sort of blue highlights on the mask. I don't know, there's just something kind of nice about that. It's just, again, that nice little pop of color. I always talk about the pops of color. They're nice. It looks cool. So the silver, a little bit of blue, and the sand green and the dark bluish grey there. It's a lovely looking colour scheme. So that's pretty cool. And these big bulky shoulder pads are really interesting, using those Ben 10 torso pieces there. It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice. With that, let's talk about the frame itself. So taking a look at the kind of just the whole arm there, it's all using prefab pieces. There's no sort of like heavy customization or, complex designs to make that there, but it gets the job done. Doesn't really need to be more than that. And we can see that on the sort of upper arm there's some light bluish grey pieces there and room for connections. And when we see how the shoulder pads are added, there's some sort of piece that's been inserted into that light bluish grey part just to kind of branch out the Ben 10 torso, and then it's been placed sort of on an angle there. So nice to see how that's done. Very simple, very, with some of the stuff we were seeing before, like I was saying, it's this big sort of mesh of different pieces. This is a bit more of a sort of slimmed down version, but it gets the job done, doesn't it? So that's pretty cool. So we spoke about pistons before. Taking a look at the pistons on this mock, they're doing some good stuff. We can see that instead on this mock, the pistons are on the upper legs. So, hey, maybe that's just the specific area that it needed a little bit of extra sort of structural support. But there's also some that sort of lead up into the torso as well. And that actually just kind of looks like a nice design, even if that's not serving any sort of structural purpose. Kind of just looks nice. Looks like some sort of, I know you could kind of see those pistons sort of moving and breathing as the character sort of moves and flexes, but it also kind of looks like some sort of like engine or some sort of industrial mechanical kind of greebling or detailing or something. I know there's just something kind of nice about it, and depending on how you kind of layer the armor, it could just look really cool. So it's nice to see pistons like this, which serve a purpose, but also just kind of look nice. So I like that personally. The foot design's really interesting on this mock. You can kind of see in this one image here how one part of it has that sort of upper leg armor piece just inserted on the front, and the other one that's been taken off to show you how it's done. It's kind of cool. It's just a bit more of an interesting way of doing that foot design, a little bit bigger of a foot design compared to like your Mutter feet or something else. But it's just a nice sort of more heavily customizable way of doing that there. So I like that. It gets the job done. It's also interesting, just quickly going back to those pistons, how the sort of bulk of the waist is focusing on those pistons. It's where a lot of them are kind of branching out of. The waist has that sort of double layer of sand green hand connector pieces, and one of them goes into the actual leg, one of them goes into the pistons, and then directly above that there's more hand connector pieces that go into the pistons that go onto the rest of the torso there. So interesting to see that all localized in one spot. I don't know. I mean, I guess that probably helps structurally. I'm not 100% sure, but, well, it works. Gets the job done and looks kind of nice, and just a bit more of a simple way of doing that waist design there, and focusing on structural integrity at the same time. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. This is a very nice mock. Let's move over to the next one. This mock here is by BHL Studios, and this is Von Ness. So when you take a look at not only some of the Hero Factory like animated movies and different things, just some of your Hero Factory lore, the character of Von Nebula, he started out as a Hero Factory dude named Von Ness, and then he's like, nah, I'm gonna take the cool parts of my name and make it sound even cooler, So Von Ness becomes Von Nebula, and there's not actually a lot of Von Ness mocks out there. Which is, it's always nice to see one, so cool to see it here. And taking a look at this actual mock here, it's nice to see how he's taken elements from the original Von Nebula toy, and sort of, added little Hero Factory tropes and flares and different things, giving him some sort of distinct weapon that you would, more typically see on a Hero Factory character, giving him the actual Hero Factory torso, makes sense, and kind of, I don't know, still giving him the shoulder spikes. I like the fact that, even when he was a Hero Factory hero dude, he was still a little bit edgy, and he's like, nah, I'm gonna put shoulder spikes on me like I'm a villain. And everyone was probably like, dude, why didn't we see this coming? He had shoulder spikes. That was a clear indication that he was a bad dude. but it gets the job done. So it's nice to see sort of taking the original ideas of Von Nebula, adding it in with your typical things that you see in Hero Factory, and making a pretty good version of Von Ness. So let's take a look at the frame of this MOC here. What I like about it is, once again, it's a little bit more sort of simplistic and straightforward, but it's a nice way of just taking some of your Hero Factory MOCs to a different level. So if you wanted to do something similar like this, I guess that's what it's perfect for. What I like immediately is on the back, there's some of those sort of like gears that sort of just kind of make a bit of I guess like a backpack of sorts. It kind of reminds me of some of the gear functions that we would see on Bionicle sets, which, it was always nice. And I just liked that aesthetic a lot as a kid, and I still like it today, and I'm sure you guys feel the same. But it's cool to see that there because it kind of implies that there's a gear function on this character, even though I don't actually think there is. Yeah, I don't think so. I think that they're just there for aesthetic purposes, but perhaps I'm wrong, and BHL Studios can let me know. But that kind of just looks nice, doesn't it? So if you want to sort of imply that there's a gear function, or just kind of go with that kind of gear aesthetic that Bionicle often used, just a nice way of doing that there. But also you could maybe replace those gears and add like a jetpack, or use it as room to add like shoulder-mounted turrets or something interesting. So it's nice to see that the backpack is really heavily a part of this design and allows for some sort of customization there, which is works well for a frame. On the legs specifically, because the upper arms are just your typical kind of prefab limbs, there's not much to talk about there. The lower legs are more or less the same, but we can see some stuff being added over the top of it there. So we get some more kind of pronounced like knee pads, and some room on the sides there on the upper legs, just to add a little bit more onto the legs. So when we take a look at the actual MOC, we can see that some of the gaps within the placement of the Hero Factory armor pieces are kind of filled in with those little subtle details there, which is nice because you take a look at some of your Hero Factory or CCBS sets, and the armor can look really nice from one angle, but from another angle, it doesn't look as nice because there's sort of an exposed area. So using this frame here, you kind of allow for room to kind of cover up some of those exposed areas, like I was saying before, which is helpful and really nice. So what's good about this frame is it's a nice way of taking a more or less kind of prefab Hero Factory hero design and adding some slight flares to it to make it look just that much cooler. So this is very nice. It's very cool. So now that HF Feb's over, if you still want to build heroes, maybe you could use this frame to build some more kind of cool customizable Hero Factory heroes. Let's move over to the final MOC now. This is a banger of a MOC. This is Gypsy Avenger by Catpipe. Of course, Gypsy Avenger being inspired by the Pacific Rim movies, which were pretty cool movies. And certainly had a lot of interesting character and mech and robot and monster designs, which would work well for a bit of Bionicle inspiration. So if you haven't watched the movie, might be worth watching, might give you some ideas, because I remember when those movies came out, there were a lot of MOCs that followed that were based off of those character designs. So if you're looking for a movie to give you some inspiration, that might be one for you there. But let's dive into this crazy MOC. So the frame itself is very sort of Technic heavy and does, of course, allow for a lot of sort of system integration because this MOC is pretty much like 90% system. And I know this is the Bionicle Inspiration series, I understand, but hey, MOCs these days do tend to lean a little bit more towards system just because we don't have as much CCBS available in the market. But there's still a lot we can learn from this that I think would directly give you some inspiration for your Bionicle stuff. So bear with me if you're like, no, system is the enemy. No, sirs and madams. Don't worry. It's good. It's going to help us out. So let's take a look at this MOC in comparison to the actual source material here. It's pretty accurate. It's really, really nice. One of the awesome things with playing with such a large scale like this is you can really, really hone in on detail here. So if you've got the pieces, if you've got the time, if you've got the investment, by all means, build a massive MOC because you can do some crazy cool stuff because of it. Specifically, like the finger design on this MOC here, it's super posable, it's super accurate and super nice, but it's because this MOC is so big. You couldn't really do that hand design there on a typical Toa build. The hands would just look way too big. But when you get this big, you can get some really nice posability in there and make them look really lifelike. So that's just awesome. The actual sort of head design here, very accurate, very nice. Love that sort of, I don't know, it's kind of a T-shaped visor, but not quite a T-shape. Whatever it is, looks really cool. The heart light's lovely. And actually some of these parts of this MOC here do seem to light up, like the little lights on the side of the shoulders there. That's super cool. The sword is also very, very nice. I think in the original source material, it's sort of like a translucent orange, but the specific pieces that were used there kind of allow for a little bit more sort of like structural integrity, which, sometimes you got to sacrifice color or some certain element there if you want posability or if you want structural integrity. So, little sacrifices like that I think are still worthwhile. It's also been a while since I've seen Pacific Rim, so maybe I'm wrong about the color there, but that's what I remember from when I saw the movie. Might be wrong. Anyway, this mock is also incredibly posable, which is fantastic, and I think that leads us into talking directly about the frame now, because, well, that's the best way to talk about the posability. So there's a whole bunch of different images here of the frame, and if you take a look at the links in the description, there is even more images that I didn't include here that showcase sort of the entire build process of this mock. So be sure to check that out if you really want to sort of in-depth study this mock. But what I think is super notable is that there's a lot of pieces that are being repeated all throughout this. One of them is specifically like this piece, and I think there's a few other sort of size varieties of this part, but this one I can see a whole bunch of. This is Technic Lift Arm Modified Frame Thick 5x7 Open Center. They don't make those names catchy. But that's what the piece is. That's there on Bricklink. And then the other piece that's being used is this Technic Turntable 56 tooth and black grey top. So those pieces there kind of make up the bulk of the frame here. Not only does it make it lightweight because it's for the most part hollow, right? There's this sort of very loose frame, and then in the areas where the arms connect to the body, the legs connect to the body, they use those turntable pieces to really kind of lock it in place, but also get a little bit of posability as well, because of course it's a turntable, you can actually move and rotate it. So that in itself is just really interesting and really cool to see as well. It's nice to know that if you have bulk of those pieces there's just a lot you can do. So let's keep our attention on those specific pieces, and let's focus on the arm design here. So we can see that there's kind of like 5 sections on this arm design, which when you look at your actual arm, there's not really 5 sections. You've got your hand, you've got your lower arm and your upper arm, and then the elbow that sort of branches it and the shoulder and stuff like that, which that's 5, isn't it? Anyway, while I disproved my theory, they're in different locations here, specifically on this arm design. So let's take a look at it. So we've got room for the hand there, which we can see in some of these pictures. But then we've got one of those sort of Technic lift arm pieces there that makes up sort of just the front of the arm. Then another bit that makes up the rest of the sort of lower arm there. Then we've got a bit that sort of acts as the elbow, which is sort of rotated on its side there, but can sort of be rotated in other directions. Then we've got sort of kind of 1 or 2 additional areas there that kind of make up the bulk of the upper arm, and then a separate section for the shoulder there, and then an additional section that kind of makes up a bit more of the shoulder, but then starts to branch out into the actual torso itself. So what's cool about this is that in some of these pictures, we can see them really kind of twisting and rotating. The fact that, the lower arm can kind of twist in some directions so that the hand can have a little bit extra posability. And just, some of these crazy looking poses look very lifelike with the way that the arm itself is actually bending. So it's interesting to see that some of these connections allow for sort of twisting or bending, which on your typical kind of like prefab arm designs that you would see on like Toa and Hero Factory builds, you really just got the bend. You got that in, where the shoulder is and where the elbow is, and then on the wrist. Whereas here, there's additional areas of posability that allow for even more sort of like lifelike movement, which is the sort of twisting thing that I'm talking about. So there's a lot more sort of sections to this arm design than there maybe typically would be on a typical kind of prefab build, but it allows for so much more like crazy looking posability, which is really, really impressive. One thing that's hard to ignore, and I'm surprised I didn't bring it up already, is the fact that this mock is resting on kind of like a tripod thing. So I don't know exactly how that's connected. It's a little hard to see in some of these pictures, but it seems like it's kind of just shoved up its butt, and it gets the job done, right? But one, I think just the fact that this is resting on a tripod makes it pretty easy to build this. You can probably adjust the length of that tripod there, and you could maybe kind of like sit on a chair or sit on the floor or just sort of stand as you build it. So it maybe helps with the back support, all that sort of stuff. And it just allows you to sort of build it in multiple different areas, or whether you're sitting or standing, whatever. But it's also nice because you can kind of display it like that as well. When this mock is done, it's also on the tripod. And I believe, because I have seen Catpipe stuff before, though I haven't seen this in person, him and Henry Pinto, who I believe are friends within their local lug. These guys are Australian, so I roughly know some stuff about them. They just actually take the mock on the tripod and put it down at conventions there, so that it's just a good way to display it, right? So if you're building a mock that's large enough, or heck, maybe if you're building a mock that's small enough, why not build it onto a specific tripod like that? You can get very large tripods for like cameras or other different things, but you can also get tripods that are fairly small that you can use for like your phone or smaller cameras and different stuff like that. So maybe it's worth just buying a non-Lego tripod like that and using it as a sort of structural support system that also allows you to display it as well. So I don't know, I just think that's really interesting and just a great way for a really nice display and kind of building solution there. It's pretty cool. Or you could have it sit on the couch like in this image here, which is very funny. Some other stuff about this frame, which is just really, really cool, is that it has some toe posability, which you don't really see that every day. Sometimes it's a little difficult to have a bit of toe posability on your typical kind of, tower-sized build, just because, well, they're a little smaller. It's not as easy to do. You can still do it, but it's not as easy to do. But it's nice to see that here because, again, you can get even more sort of lifelike poses out of it because of that. And, with our feet in general, we can have a bit of flex there with the toes. So, makes sense. And it's just cool to see so much crazy posability all throughout this mock here, which is a lot more easy and possible because of the huge size of this mock. It's pretty cool. It's very impressive. So yeah, while this build is more sort of system heavy, the Technic heavy frame and the way that posability is so key to this mock, the way it's displayed and stuff like that, I think all those sort of basic principles we can really take into our Bionicle focused building that maybe doesn't have as much system. So maybe you learned a thing or two there, maybe not. Either way, that was 5 different frame designs and the awesome mocks to go with them. So if you want to see some of the other mocks that these builders have built, there's links in the description to their social media, so be sure to check that out and maybe do a bit of research, see what you can kind of find there, see what some of the other stuff these guys have done, and maybe that could be some inspiration for your own custom frames, or maybe you want to try and reverse engineer some of these frames yourself and use them for your own mocks. Could be something worth doing. Also in the description is links to my own social media, so if you want to check some of that stuff out, you can do so right there. But also, if you want to submit some of your own mocks to the show, you want to see your own stuff right here, you can do so through the submission email. It's on your screen right now, but it's also in the description below if you want to copy and paste it. All you got to do is send me an email to that email address, include some pictures, include some info, kind of whatever you want. There's no specific rules to that there, but any sort of info you think is important, put that in the email, and then I will add it onto the show when I can. I get a lot of submissions, but hey, don't be discouraged. Send your submission in, and it may be featured on the show in the near but distant future. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully this inspired you a little bit. If it did, let me know, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.